Hey everybody, welcome to another live. So I am going to be adding our guest for the night, the esteemed Dr. Yvette Pegues. And how are we on time? So we're just ahead of time actually, 8:28. Hello Nadine, thank you for joining. Thank you guys. Sabrina, Tamara, you're the real MVP because we just met yesterday. Thank you so much for your support. Alrighty, so our guest should be coming on shortly. So today's live is called Rehab and Resilience Wellness Talks. And for the month of September, I promised to share information about suicide prevention. September is Suicide Prevention Month. Along with a lot of other causes, including National Rehabilitation Awareness Month, as well as Self-Care Month. And if you think about it, all of these issues and causes, they all kind of intertwine. They're all related to each other. Jordana, thank you for joining us. Okay, Yvette is in the audience. I'm going to get her to join on as a speaker. Okay. So bear with me, and we're going to get through this as everyone is coming in. All right. Invited. So Yvette, you should see something come in on your end to, hey, co-space in the building. Miss Bella V. You know who you are. Justin, thank you for joining. Oh, all my peoples is in the place. You guys, I really appreciate you. So again, tonight's conversation is about, it's called Rehab and Rehabilitation. Well, Rehab and Resilience. And we are discussing from, we're discussing September, right? September is suicide prevention. And it is also Rehabilitation Month or Rehabilitation Awareness Month, as well as Self-Care Month. And those three things, as I mentioned, are all intertwined. And Dr. Yvette Pegues, she is a disability advocate. And so she's going to be discussing, her work, what she does in that space. And we're going to be going through a few questions throughout this hour to touch on how disabilities, both visible and invisible, how they come into play with, all the issues of this month: suicide prevention, rehabilitation, self-care. So thank you, Celestial Lux, for joining. Tony. Alrighty, we're still waiting on our guest to come on. We might have to log off and log back in if there's still some difficulty. Bear with me, guys. Okay, so I got a message from Yvette. She says she's watching. She's here on the live, but she, for some reason, cannot receive the invitation. So can you try to make a request to join? You can do that as well on your end, and then we'll get right to it. Yes. Yeah, it's sent. The invitation is sent. Just waiting on you to respond. Alrighty. Monday night. get all these people joined in for Monday night. I truly appreciate you guys' presence, although it's live. And you guys are early too, 8:33. I don't care what they say about my people. It's a live event, but you guys are here and in the place. Jimmy, thank you for joining. All right, so like I said, we're still waiting on Dr. Yvette to join us. Hopefully she come on in a minute. I'm gonna give it a few. If she's still saying unable, I don't know why. Hey there, Andrea, Nadej. Okay. So we have some new faces that came in. And again, tonight's talk is going to be about rehab and resilience. September is Suicide Prevention Month, as well as National Rehabilitation Awareness and Self-Care Month. All these issues intertwine. And so that's what we're going to be discussing tonight. Dr. Yvette, I got her invitation. So, okay.
Hey.
Awesome. All right. Thank you so much for your patience. Because I was like, okay, what's happening here?
We got it.
We got it. And we're live. Yes. Natalia, thank you for joining. Everybody, thank you for being here.
Hey, everybody.
Yes. So let me just go ahead and do a quick introduction. She's, is going to tell you a little bit more about what she does. But tonight we are talking about rehab and resilience. It's a wellness talk. This is all about honoring Suicide Prevention Month, as well as National Rehabilitation Month. It is also Self-Care Month. So all of those causes and issues are being addressed in the month of September. And the reason why I requested, and I'm so thankful that she accepted my, my request to join me on live tonight, is because Dr. Yvette Pegues, she is a disability advocate, and she has a wealth of knowledge and experience in this realm of disability. She talks about both visible and invisible, and we're going to discuss and go deep into all of that tonight. And so I'm going to just let her take it away.
So I think the most important part of what's happening tonight is that this is my baby cousin, and her dad and my dad are brothers, and I'm just so proud of her and what she's doing in this wellness boutique area almost, because she's always been fashionable. She's always been incredible. And now we're both moms and we're both on live. So I'm really excited for this full circle, as you mentioned. And I mean, I can talk just a little bit about myself. We were both born and raised in Miami, Florida. I was redirected to Atlanta, Georgia by my work. And I was, in my opinion, a very successful and excited engineer for IBM at the time. And, life was great until it wasn't. I went in for some physical pain on the right side of my body, found out that I was born with a brain malformation, went in for brain surgery, and there were complications. And now I'm a T10 paraplegic. So I actually use a wheelchair full time. I don't know if you can see. Can you see? I don't have on shoes. So yes, this is my new equipment that I get to wear, and it's fashionable, right? So I mean, at the very least, at least I could be cute with it. It's pink, and it took me a while to recover. Really, it took probably 2 years after the injury. I couldn't walk, talk, or work for about 2 years, and I started to connect with organizations that provided disability services. My boys actually wrote a book because they were dealing with disability for the first time in the home. I should have one nearby. And it really helped me, because I told God, I said, listen, God, you could break me, but please don't break my babies. I don't know what's happening, and I want to be able to serve you standing up or sitting down, but I didn't want my babies to be messed up. So they actually were getting bullied at school and ended up writing a book before the age of 10. They were published authors, and they called the book "My Mommy Had Brain Surgery and I'm Okay." So that was confirmation that God had them, but it didn't change the fact that I pretty much had to stop my life for a relatively long period of time. I think 2 years is a long period of time. I didn't go back to engineering. I did end up going back to school and very recently received my Doctor of Education. It's Christian education. I also have a behavioral psychology degree. School has always been a place where I felt safe. I felt appreciated and not tolerated. So even after my injury, being first generation high school and college, it was something I felt like I needed to do for myself. So I'm so grateful. Trust me, I tried to stop and quit 101 times, but there were so many people who reminded me that their child, maybe in a K through 12 setting, was waiting for me at the finish line, because being in school and functioning as a student can be very difficult with a disability, whether it be visible or invisible. So if you were watching, I tried to back up to show you that I have a physical disability, which means I'm paralyzed from the waist down. And I'm also dealing with a traumatic brain injury. I have stitches kind of from the top of my head all the way down my neck from the brain surgery, where they literally opened up my skull to relieve the pressure of the condition that I had. So I'm grateful that we are talking about mental health. I'm grateful that we're talking about disability. You know, if you don't mind, I like to just open up with some stats, right? So disability is the largest minority in the country. There's 61 million people in the US with disabilities, visible and invisible. 85% of disabilities are invisible, which means you can't see them. It's like mental health or cancer. And of course, mobility disabilities are the most visual. Sometimes they're facial. And it's an $8 trillion industry. Being disabled is expensive. Between medications and equipment, and I drive with adapted controls, it's really expensive to be disabled. So it blows my mind that the people with the least have to pay the most to be included in society. So 1 out of every 4 people have a disability. So if you're in a room with 4 people, I promise you, one of them is either suffering from their own condition or they have a direct family member with a condition. So I think it's so important to recognize this and to also be aware of what that looks like and be educated for it.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing and really just opening the door to the fact that, yes, she is my first cousin. No play cousin here. She's my real life cousin, blood cousin. And I have to say, like, growing up, you know, I was kind of like that kid that I used to look up to the kids that have, you know, cousins and all kind of family members in the school and, you know, close by. And unfortunately, we didn't get to grow up together. And so I didn't have that experience with my cousin Yvette. However, when I first, you know, really started to get to know her better as I got older, I was like, oh my God, this is my cousin. Like, she's fly, she's smart. Like, I loved everything about her, always looked up to her. And it's no different today, especially now as mothers. And I wanted to also share, if you guys have seen my last post, so I posted something just about an hour or so ago. And it was the live. Of course, I posted the flyer for the live, but I also posted 2 throwback pictures. And in those pictures, you'll see my uncle, which is my cousin's father. That was Uncle Emilio. And, you know, we talk about full circle, but the circle keeps going, right? Because Uncle Emilio, who we affectionately called Uncle Phil, lived with us. For a few years after his wife passed, he lived with me and my family, and throughout my high school years, he was in the house with us, and so I got to see firsthand, the very first time in my life, someone living with a disability. And he as well, he was paralyzed from the waist, actually from the left.
By the stroke, right?
Yes, after enduring a stroke, and he was in a coma for several months. It was a miracle that he was able to survive that. But he went on to do rehab and therapy and such. But he was paralyzed, and so he was in a stroller. And I mean, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. That's my
It's okay. Because she's a new mom.
a
It's okay, mommy
wheelchair.
brain. It's all right, mommy brain.
Yes,
But
but
you laughing though. When I roll around in my wheelchair and there's other kids in strollers, they looking at me like, I like what you got. I want one of those. So it does feel like an adult stroller sometimes.
yes, but listen, me and Uncle Phil, me and Uncle Emilio, we were really close. And it just, when I see those pictures, it takes me back to that time,
Yeah.
because it was a very like, he made a very good impression on me. He was like, people have this idea that when they see people in a wheelchair, or when they know that someone has a disability, when they come to find out that you have a disability, because it's visible or invisible, right? They have this idea that, like, all of a sudden you have this disability, and so that means you can no longer live
Right.
an exciting life. You can no longer be fully, happy. Yes, there's some adjustments that are to be made. And, in the case of my uncle and my cousin, there are certain fundamental things that you have to learn all over again. I remember walking with him, because that was his dream, was to not only walk, but to drive again. Because
Yeah.
his accident when he caught his stroke was in a car accident.
Yeah.
And so, you know, his presence at that time had a profound impact on my life. And so now, to be able to have a platform to talk about mental health, and to know that this month is rehabilitation month, there's no way that I could let this month go by without, talking about this and acknowledging uh, this very important issue. And so that's my little tidbit. So we're going to go right into the questions. And I want to let you guys know that if you have any questions at all, feel free to enter them in the comments, or you can, click on the question mark icon so you can throw in your questions in there. And every so often, maybe about 15 minutes or so, we'll go and check on them so we can get you guys involved in the conversation as well. All right. So you touched on it, but we're going to go right into the very first question. And that's about, I'm going to say, how do visible and invisible disabilities in mental health challenges?
I'm so glad you asked that. Someone commented that when you're disabled, people think that you are helpless. And I'd like to speak on that because there's something called origin of thought, and it depends on when they were introduced to disability. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to cycle back and then cycle back forward with your question. Just want to respond to the person. And so if you go back to maybe the 1960s, people with disabilities did not have any strong medical model. They were kind of a charity model, and people just felt like the only way that they would live is if they had charity. And so if that's the point in which you learned about disability, that will never change, even if the whole world changes around you without some kind of strong impact. And then, if we go maybe to the 70s and 80s, there was a medical model when individuals felt like people with disabilities could only exist through medical intervention, where they had to fix us because we were broken, right? And so in the 1990s, when the Americans with Disabilities Act was written, then all of a sudden, there's this independent model of disability. People with disabilities are getting out of the house, and the industry started making different types of wheelchairs that go up and down, and you can become very athletic. And then there was this whole trend today, fortunately or unfortunately, where individuals with disabilities are younger, right? And they're getting out and they're doing things and they're going back to school. And there's injury, illness, accident think about COVID, right? And that's kind of a situational disability. You can have a temporary disability, and you kind of now have resources around some of the tools that you can use. And so the social model of disability is what happened in the 1990s, and today I think we're living more of the independent model. So yes, whoever it is that thinks you're helpless will likely have an origin of thought that is way outdated and doesn't make any sense anymore. And when we talk about mental health, right, there is a very clear intersection between a physical disability, invisible or visible, and mental health. I can tell you that in two different ways. First, when my dad was in a wheelchair, it was my first experience as well. I was walking and I was driving back and forth from Georgia and taking him to the Mercedes-Benz dealership and was promising him, all right, Dad, let's find your car. So as soon as you start walking, we'll pop you into this car. But now today I have a van with hand controls. So Mercedes-Benz actually posted something pretty recently about their adaptive equipment that's built into the vehicle across the assembly line. And so, I mean, it made me emotional because I'm thinking, oh my God, I wish this was available when my dad was alive, because he wanted so bad to be able to drive again. So I drive with my hands, not my feet. And I can also tell you, when men are disabled, regardless of whether it's visible or invisible, there's a greater amount of shame and guilt. Because if you think about a man and his headship of a household, there's so much more shame because they're known as strong and powerful. And my dad was just incredible. He would mop with his hands and roll around, remember, with his feet. And his room was probably the cleanest I've ever seen, because that was just who he was. And I would come and pick him up, and he'd get his hair dyed and all his toiletries and stuff. He was also always a really clean man, but I can tell there were times where I would take him out and he felt really ashamed of having to stop every few minutes and use the bathroom, and my having to help him in and out. He just wouldn't drink anything, so that I didn't have the burden of having to help him into the bathroom. That has not changed. After my brain injury, it was a traumatic brain and spinal cord injury. The first thing they did at the hospital is they put me on psychotropic drugs. They quickly made sure that I was heavily and highly medicated, which had to stop because I was not present for my children. There was a moment where my babies came home and they had a note and they were asking their teacher, is my mommy gonna die? They had not seen me horizontal for long periods of time. And in that moment, I sat up, tied myself upright, and said, you know what? That's when I said, God, I need to be present for my kids. I got off a lot of those drugs. I received therapy for it. And I just want to say to anyone on the line who has any form of mental illness or health concerns to seek help. Help is out there. It's not as much of a stigma anymore, because there's emotional impacts. There's pain and symptom management. There's what else? Of course, the social isolation that we were talking about. There's body image and self-esteem. I deal with that all the time. And so mental health could be circuitous. It's not a one-time thing, right? It's depression that goes so far that you cannot function in your daily activities, and that you need to receive medication and counseling and therapy to be able to function in your daily life. That's what takes it over the line. And there should be no stigma. There should be help, because there's stress, and then there's coping, and then you have to get access to care. And some of the thing I was talking about earlier is, as Sabine mentioned, like caregiver and mental health support. So I don't know if you ever noticed that my dad had some very brown days, if you will, because he was trying to compete with who he was prior to the injury, the stroke and the car accident, and then losing his wife. There was just so much going on in his life that everything that you would normally hold with one hand or even with two hands become too heavy. And that's where friends and family comes in. That's where the positive resilience and reinforcement comes in. So it's a very clear intersection, and we can talk about mental and emotional rehab if you'd like as well.
Yes. Wow. Thank you so much for that response. And And again, for just being here, because like I said, Uncle Philip, you know, he was such a strong presence in my life at that time. And, you know, just in everything that you're speaking of, even the fact that the Mercedes Benz has adapted a vehicle. I mean, it's insane. So like last year, we were just offline talking about this, but I'll go ahead and introduce that into the conversation. So my husband and I just recently celebrated 8 years together. That's our dating anniversary, right? And so we celebrate that probably more than our wedding anniversary. And so last year we celebrated by going to Atlanta. It was just kind of like a spare of the moment type of trip, but I was so happy that we went because I hadn't seen my cousin in so long, and I had, you know, some other people that I wanted to catch up with. But of course, you know, we started talking about the old days and everything, and it just, you know, kind of hit me that, like, as you mentioned, you know, my uncle, your father, he was a very, you know, he took great pride in himself and his, you know, his space. He lived with us, and I'm telling you, like, I was always on his side of the house.
Oh,
It's just like he first of all, he had such life about him. You know, he was always, you know, it didn't, and maybe it didn't register to me that he had those down days, right? All of us do,
yeah.
but he carried himself in such a way that it was just such an example to me that, like, no matter what you go through, you can always push past whatever is happening. Of course, there's support, you know, around, but at the end of the day, that's what the resilience is all about, that you can continue to push forward. And um, so we'll get into more of, you know, those little anecdotes later, but I want to go ahead and move forward. And I don't know that we have any questions just yet, but thank you all for tuning in and joining us. So um, I wanted
We
to,
talked about number two. Is it the
yes,
misconceptions? Yeah. Well, mental well-being of individuals with disabilities. So I could dig a little deeper unless you want to jump into another one of your questions. Because I mean, I can talk to you about body image and self-esteem. You know, of
you know,
course, I think we talked a little bit about that, about how it can affect your body image and self-esteem, and how to struggle with self-acceptance and experience the negative self-perception that a lot of people have of people with disabilities, and how that can influence their mental health. Because I want to be clear, as I mentioned early on in this live, that I was diagnosed with a brain injury, went in, now I have a spinal cord injury. And after years of sitting down 90% of the time, I have also structural issues and pressure sores. And so there's almost a continuum. Mental health hardly ever starts with mental health, right? Mental health may start with physical health. Mental health might start with diet. Mental health may be after a loss of something. So mental health is not permanent, and nor is it always something that's congenital. I mean, there are some people who were born with specific, um, um, you know, sometimes it's medical, sometimes it's environmental, but there's so many fingerprints. So I don't want to put this into a box, but I do want to say that, you know, mental health is ongoing. And I heard someone say once that mental health, especially when you are specifically diagnosed like schizophrenia and some of these specific neurological conditions, that you can't help. I mean, being bipolar and things of those nature, you might be seen as someone just with a bad attitude, or someone who's rude, or, you know, some kind of behavioral representation of your official medical condition. But a lot of times, um, I think there's this misconception that you're doing something wrong, or that it's your fault. You know, Sabine, you're a new mom. Postpartum is a form of mental health. And a lot of people, believe it or not, that have mental health diagnoses do not consider themselves disabled. And so it's only now that it's starting to be recognized and um, respected, for lack of a better word, as a disability, because that's the whole difference. You can't see my brain injury and some of the cognitive delays and neurological disorders that's come from my brain injury, but you can't see my physical disability. And I sometimes feel like if I didn't have the physical disability, people would not recognize my invisible disability. And it's hard. It's hard to have a mental illness or a mental and medical diagnosis and to be able to ask for a day off or to ask for help. People just assume if you can't see it, it doesn't exist. But again, that's 85% of disabilities are unseen. So I'm glad you're asking that question, because we need to believe what we are told. It's not our responsibility to give someone a diagnosis, to confirm or deny their diagnosis. If someone tells you that they have an invisible disability, the best you can do as an employer and a friend is to just believe them and support them and make sure that they get the help that they need to improve and maintain their health. Make sense?
Yes. And I just want to, we got a comment from the audience here, Miss Izzy, who, I don't know if you remember, Miss Izzy was at dinner with us when we came to visit last year.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Hey, Miss Izzy.
So Miss Izzy, her mother, she's a good friend of mine, and her mother is, she has vision problems, and so her vision is diminished, just like some people may not know this, just like my father at this point.
Yeah.
He's legally blind, and so it's hard. But anyway, so she talks about how as a caretaker, you need to find time to make sure that you're okay. And
Yes.
finding resources to help not just me, but my mom. And so that's very important because you mentioned emotional mental health.
Yeah.
So, and like in our communities, there's always the talk about being strong, always the talk. We named this live rehab and resilience, right? But that's not absent of, taking time to replenish yourself, to rejuvenate, to make sure that you are in a position where you can be of service to someone else. Because if you don't take care of yourself first, then you're of no help to anyone. And so, thank you, Miss Izzy, for adding onto the conversation. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I like that, Miss Izzy, because I fired my husband very shortly after my injury. He felt I think he felt the pressure. I'm just going to keep it real of making sure that I was okay. And at some point, I'm like, when I got better and I started to learn some things, and I had been in rehab for quite some times, I had graduated from rehab. So I came out feeling like, listen, this is not sexy. We need to do something different. Let's bring someone in to take care of me, like biologically and physically, and bathing and all those things. And when we're out, hold my hand. I want you to be my husband right now. Of course, if there's an emergency, I want you to know and be trained, because all through my physical therapy and my rehab, he was invited to see how things were done. But for him to be the primary healthcare support, personal healthcare support, and caregiver was just too much on our marriage. And we had two small boys to raise. So Miss Easy, that's 100%. And it makes me feel better too, because now when I'm with my husband, even though now there are things we started and he continues to do with and for me, it did not support our family. And very briefly, I had two young boys, and I had the same kind of codependence on my husband as they did. So they used to look at me like a big grown child, because he needed to feed me and take me places and do things. And so when I finally started driving, I was like, okay, I need them to see me as an adult, as a parent, as someone that can help them. So that's a really good point.
Yes. Alrighty. I'm looking down at these
Yeah,
questions.
I think we talked about a lot of them.
Exactly, because a lot of the answers kind of they overlap. So
I could talk about language too.
what's that?
I could talk about language, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think language is huge, because, we talked about the different mental models of disability and how we used to look at disability, but also how we used to talk about disability. So it's not okay, even if you're playing, to say, oh my God, I'm paralyzed with fear, or I'm losing my mind, or I feel crazy, or even crazy in love, because those words have become very sensitive. The R word is not used as much. Even handicap is not used as much. There's people first language instead of me being a disabled person. I'm a person with a disability. Some people with sight impairments would rather be called blind. Um, Little people used to be called something different. So I think as society starts to open up and accept and understand and support disabilities, our language is changing a little bit as well. So it's important to know what's necessary. I still have people call me handicapped. I still have people saying that I'm wheelchair bound. And depending on, the environment, I won't say anything. I'll just say, you know what, that's a really good point. But, I'm involved in 21 different adapted sports, which includes scuba diving and water skiing and snow skiing and jet skiing and golf and tennis and basketball. And some of those things I don't have to do in my wheelchair. So I try to look at every situation as an opportunity to have a conversation and to educate that person. So once they see me and they have the experience of me, that they'll look at disability differently.
So I want to know, we're going to go back to the introduction, right? So you are a disability advocate. You also are the CDO, right?
Yeah.
Chief Disability Officer.
Diversity. Yes.
Diversity.
Mm-hmm. No worries.
For your organization, right?
Yes.
And so I guess what I wanted to say is, like, what does that look like? Like, what are you doing in the community? How do you present, and how could you be of service to maybe an organization, a church, because, right, your degree is from a Christian university, right? So how does that play out?
Great question. I'm doing for others I'm doing for others what I couldn't find for myself. And so when I was in rehab, everything was within reach. Anything I needed, whether it was equipment or counseling or support, it was right there. But then when I got home, none of that existed for me, and it was hard to find it. So we started Your Invisible Disability Group as a resource and navigation program. The way that it works is when you're newly disabled and diagnosed, you can reach out to our organization. We do kind of an intake, and we'll say, okay, this is what you need. If it's an invisible or visible disability, if you need resources or equipment. And because of my connection within this community, I can say, hey, call Sabine, she'll hook you up with a bed, or she'll hook you up with resources, and it doesn't have to be right here in Georgia. And that's what it started out as being, right? It just started out as being able to help someone kind of transition into a new life and never leaving who they are, but maybe what they used to be behind, as much as is needed for them to create this new experience. And so there's counseling and support. But what happened over time is we now had businesses who were wanting to hire individuals with disabilities or call themselves inclusive, and they weren't. So I ended up doing a lot of speaking. I've done a TED Talk. I do a lot of training with major organizations, and I'm on a lot of boards. So I'm on ADA committees and accessible boards. I chair a lot of policy organizations to make sure that disability on every level, from policies and laws to people and programs, are supported. So, our mission is to to educate, to advocate, and to include individuals with disabilities within the society. And that sounds simple, and I hope to work myself out of a job at some point, but it's not as much common in the workplace or in education as it used to be. So a lot of it is speaking, a lot of it is workshopping, a lot of it is counseling and consulting, and a lot of it is really customized. And I also do a lot of ADA testing. So I'm also an ADA civil rights tester, which means that I go into organizations and make sure that they have what they say they have for architectural and attitudinal barriers, so we can get into buildings and into work programs. So a lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff. But thank you so much for your work. And we had, like I said, a conversation offline, not today, but before, and we were discussing your journey, right, into getting your degree.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring that up because you were talking about how you go to different organizations to make sure they're in compliance, and meanwhile, you being the advocate that you are, were in school, right, obtaining your doctorates, and your institution did not have some of those same, services and resources available even for you.
Right.
So if you want to talk a little bit about that, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. So the way the law is written up, unless you receive federal funding, you do not have to be ADA compliant. The expectation is that churches and charity organizations will do the right thing. So since this is a faith-based university and they did not receive federal funding to their knowledge, they did not have a responsibility to have an Office of Disability Services, but they accepted me into their doctoral program. So very shortly after starting the program, although I was assigned an individual to support me through my education career, it was very clear that I needed a community, an entire community, not a single person. And so they were very open because of the separation of church and state. They didn't have to do it, but because it was also a faith-based organization, my question was, why wouldn't you? Wouldn't you want to? And I was able to work with them and do kind of what I did outside of school. I was able to self-advocate. I had every tool in my tool belt to advocate for other people. But when it came to advocating for myself, it was the hardest thing ever. And so as a result of that, they now have over 50 students with disabilities using those services that we were able to build over an 18-month program. And that's the legacy we all want to fulfill. There's something called bystander, right? To watch something happen and maybe put your, clutch your pearls and say, oh my. But then there's an upstander who says that was wrong, whether it's a disability, whether it's a female, whether it's someone in a different gender community. If you see something, say something, whether they're in the room or not. So advocacy is not something you need to be trained in. That comes from the heart. And I was able to turn bystanders into upstanders, and they're now champions maintaining this Office of Disability Services office that other people are now trying to emulate. And the faculty is getting on board. Students now feel comfortable disclosing their disability, visible or otherwise, that is directly corresponding with their desire to fulfill their academic requirements. So that was difficult. It took a very long time, and it was hard to advocate for myself and be a student and be a mom and a wife. It was a lot of work, but it was absolutely worth it.
Yes, and since we're on the topic of school, right? I would love if you would share what your dissertation, like what you wrote your dissertation, that is in line with, all of this as well.
Yes, I like to, I don't know, I have this fan on my face. Hold on. I want to make sure that I give you the official name, because I know if anybody's watching that went through it with me is going to have a fit. So I'm going to post it. But basically, so the title was Disabled Disciples Following Jesus on Organized Missions. And it was a mixed method study for churches to include people with disabilities in missional outreach. So I feel strongly about the Great Commission, and I feel strongly that it's everybody's responsibility to fulfill the Great Commission. And the Great Commission is simply increasing the population of heaven here on earth, right? Teaching and telling people about Christ. There's a difference between mission and missions, right? It's our mission to love everybody, but to go on mission means to intentionally go into the world, go to across the world to tell people about Jesus. And so prior to my disability, I went on multiple mission trips, Haiti, Dominican Republic, and different places. And afterwards, to go on missions in my wheelchair seemed to be such a heavy load to carry. And I just felt like my wheelchair is not an excuse not to fulfill the Great Commission and to do God's will. And I feel like he wouldn't allow me to get into a wheelchair if I couldn't serve him from this wheelchair, even if it's just through lives and conversations and, whatever I do locally. But I think the first time I went out of the country in my wheelchair, they said to me, well, are you here to help us or are we supposed to help you? And I think for the first time, they were able to see the dichotomy of like, wait a minute, this land of milk and honey that we call the US of A, isn't that perfect? Because here's this broken person coming to help us. And they were able to connect to me because they're like, wow, I'm broken too. And so they were able to, I think the pastor at the time was helping geriatric um, homeless or unhoused individuals who at one point was cutting cane in Dominican Republic, and when they got too old to cut cane and to work in that agricultural industry, they just kind of dropped them off on the side of the road, and he started to collect each of them and help them in his church and house them. And a lot of them had mental health issues, unresolved. Some had to do with just being undernourished. A lot of it just have to be with that disposition and displacement and just being underserved. So he had to deal with a lot of that. And there's no medication necessary that they can take. It's just, good old fashioned love and support and just prayer. So I feel like it's important for individuals with disabilities to feel like they are of service. That doesn't mean they have to, travel to Africa in a wheelchair, but missions can start right here in our backyard. So I'm working with several churches right now to create curriculum and use my dissertation tools. And I'm even, partnering with Johnny and Friends at some point to make sure that we are intentionally and individually invited to go on missions, whether it starts at home, in the church, across the street, or across the country.
Yes, you mentioned Johnny and Friends, and I only recently learned about Johnny and Friends, and isn't it, her story is incredible.
Yeah,
So I wanted to quickly Google it, but if you have a better understanding than me, you could.
absolutely. She's 71 years old, and she was 17 when she took a dive into a lake and broke her neck. And she's a paraplegic, and the difference is that she's paralyzed from the shoulder down. So even moving her arms are difficult because that particular disc in her back is higher up and it controls like the arms. And sometimes we say, girl, you got good hands, because she can move them a little bit through rehabilitation, but she's had this ministry over time to be able to love God from her condition. And I think she used to paint when she was very young. She painted with her mouth, and she was able to meet and marry her husband, but she can't even get out of bed without support. So there are times where she's just literally laying on her back, praying to God to get her out of her bed. And there are people that are assigned and paid for to be able to support her, but sometimes she can't even muster a smile up because it's just so difficult. But she has been ministering. She worked with Billy Graham for a very long time. Johnny and Friends is a ministry where they provide academic material for churches and individuals, not just to learn about disability, but to serve people with disabilities. And of course, she has a Facebook page. But as soon as I, became disabled, my church was like, you got to meet Johnny. You got to meet Johnny, because think about it. She's 71. So the people that she had to probably meet are those same people I was telling you about that believe the charity or the medical model of disability. And she broke that wide open, especially in the faith-based communities. And she has camps every year because of the same thing, because of respite. If you're a parent of a child with a disability, that is so draining. Really, it takes everything you have, and sometimes for the rest of that child's life, to be able to support them. So this is a respite, it's a camp, and also couples go to camp as well because it has a very heavy bearing on a relationship. Disability has probably about a 70% divorce rate when it happens to a family member, especially a child or a spouse. So I'm blessed that my husband is still around. But yeah, that's why I get made up and cute, because I'm still married. I still have a husband. And, I still want to be a Proverbs 31 wife and be his helpmate, which I love to do, and to submit to his leadership, because I do believe that, he's leading our house in a way that has blessed us all. And that is perfectly okay with me.
Amen. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing on that. And since we're talking about all the amazing things that you can do, despite, any physical or mental, emotional limitations, right? I want to share a fun fact that, I mean, the people who know you know this, but not my audience, is that my cousin Yvette, she's also participated in pageants. Okay. So when I tell you, look, I'm gonna tell you guys, if for those who follow me on my bio, and I take this very seriously, on my bio it says mother and mental health advocate, but make it glam, and that's
Yes.
because it's always been a part of me. Like I've always been kind of that girly girl, and my cousin is no different. It's in the family, it runs in the family, and she has been in pageants, even post her injury. And so how did that all come about?
Girl, I think you need to think back a little further. I I I really felt honored to be in your presence because my girly girl didn't actually kick in until after my disability. Like I was like, as long as my hair and face is clean, I'm cool. But Sabine was modeling. She was like bringing out those outfits. I mean, all the things that I didn't even consider until after my injury, and I was approached about one of only two wheelchair pageants that are nationally recognized. And I had never heard about it before, and I was absolutely not interested. I was working with my local schools where there were children who were on the spectrum, and a brain injury can sometimes affect behavior and social inclusion. So it was helping me and them, and I was working with them, and they heard that I was working. And so they said, listen, your talent is not, based on a bathing suit competition or singing or dancing. It's your community service, and we love what you're doing in Georgia. Would you please? And I'm like, I'm cool. I'm all right. I don't like pink. I don't wear bling, and yeah, I'm straight. Who cares about my hair? And she was like, no, I think you can help people within the state of Georgia. And so eventually, with some coaxing, I said, yeah, okay, I'll do it. And so I won Miss Wheelchair Georgia, and I went on to be the first woman of color to win the national pageant as Miss Wheelchair USA. And then I went on to be Miss Wheelchair International. And that's where I learned how to put on makeup. And I had friends online who were like, girl, don't you leave the house looking like that again and taking pictures with anybody. It was the first time that I was on social media. And I really liked the USA program because it was faith inspired, but they also wanted everyone to know that you can be beautiful on the inside and the outside, and being in a wheelchair doesn't limit, how beautiful you can be. And I was able to start wearing my 4, 6, and 8-inch heels because I didn't have to walk in them anymore. I couldn't feel them, so my feet never hurt. And my sit down shoes were all the time. So it's funny that people recognize me from the foot up. And ironically, this just happened. This is just in, Sabine, after 8 years or more of being the first woman of color for Miss Wheelchair USA and even Miss Wheelchair America, which are the only two. This year, in both pageant programs, there's an African American winner. So for the first time, there are two African American title holders for both wheelchair programs. And I got to tell you, I don't think we have time on this live, that I felt like a professional athlete. I had people sending me chairs and cars and shoes and clothes and TV opportunities. It was incredible. I know it was God, but it was real, and it's a wonderful opportunity now to have an international impact and to have people in other parts of the country and parts of the state and global opportunities to talk about disability. So I think that was a catalyst, if you will, to being more like you in the fashion area.
Wow. That is hard to believe that I impact you, because
You did.
look, I remember it was like early high school years, and Yvette came by, and I was like, Mommy, that's my cousin? Because it had been some time, it had been some time. She moved away, and so it had been years. And I always told my mom, like, I remember I'm the oldest of three. I'm the only girl, and I would always tell mom when I was little, like, I want a big sister, not a little sister. I want a big sister, right? Because I didn't want to be the oldest to go through everything first. And then so, of course, when I met Yvette or met her again,
Yeah.
right, as a, an adolescent, I was like, okay, that's the big sister I never. She's the big sister I've never had, and so I'm so, happy of the timing of it all,
Yeah.
right? Back then, and of course now, because
Yeah.
we're reconnected, and now with the purpose, we both are in our purpose, and it's
Yeah.
just amazing.
So I
It's a
feel like, before my disability, I felt like I was a boss professionally, right? I had it together. I had an incredible job. I was an engineer. So I think I walked with a lot of confidence based on my professional accomplishments. Now I feel like I'm living in my purpose, and that the beauty honestly comes from within. There were times, believe it or not, and on the subject of the pageant, my mom told me, I don't know if I shared this with you, she said, you can be pretty or you can be smart. And so I had this mental model that if I'm smart, then I don't have to be pretty. But if I'm pretty, that means I'm not smart. So even now, when I see people and they're like, oh my God, you're so pretty, I felt for a long time, oh my God, does that mean I'm not smart? Like, be careful what you tell your kids, especially give it an expiration date, because they hold on to it. Nobody told me at some point I could be both, right? And so for a very long time, that used to bother me. And I prayed about it. And God was like, this has nothing to do with you. It's my light in you that's attracting these people. And there are no words for the beauty that I've placed in you. So just say thank you and tell them about me. And when I took it off of my back, it made it so much easier. So now if anybody says that, I'm always so grateful, because what I'm doing is emanating his light and his love and his joy, because I do live with chronic pain. And so I've had so many people ask me, why are you so happy? And why are you always smiling? And you're always so excited? And this happened to you. And I said, no, it happened through me. And I feel like I have a whole new ministry from this wheelchair, because there are people who stop me in my wheelchair who would have not noticed me walking. So whether I'm walking or rolling, I'm serving Christ, I'm serving his people, and I'm serving this disability community with everything that I have. So thank you for recognizing me and having me on your live tonight, Kez.
Amen, amen. So I'm looking at the time. This hour flew by.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know if you guys want to stay, whatever, but look, we've been on here for nearly an hour. We didn't even get through the questions, and now that's perfectly fine with me. Perfectly fine with me, because I think we were able to get a lot more value just in the conversation as it is.
I like
So
number 12.
number 12.
We could close out on that unless there are any questions. Oh,
We need a
somebody said
part
we
two.
need a part
I
two.
love it. I love it. So
Oh, Lisa. Hey, Lisa. I posted it on my page too, so I know, recognize a couple folks on here.
of course, of course. So yeah, we can get through 12, and then we'll, I guess, make some time if anybody has questions from the audience. So what advice would you give to someone with a disability who feels isolated or misunderstood regarding their mental health struggles?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I feel like there's like four parts, right? Never lose who you are, right? Just be reminded of that. When I started going to my doctor's appointments, I always had to be talked off of a ledge, because doctors have to give you the worst case scenario so they don't overpromise. And so I always had someone with me at those doctor's appointments, and I always had a little index card to remind me who I was. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a woman of God, I'm an advocate, because leaving those appointments sometimes, and I don't know that it's intentional, really breaks you apart. So never forget who you are. Always recognize that you have people around you who love you, whether they were blood related or otherwise. Find your people, because you have people. Do your research. And I will tell you that, especially having a physical disability, I don't always like to leave the house, but that's not always the case. You can have, I call it mental stillness, where it's sometimes built on top of your mental illness or your diagnosis, where you don't feel safe. It's scary to be in a world that doesn't understand you and that wasn't, created for you. But get help, find resources, and finally, get in the way I know that sounds crazy, and maybe it's not, as easily done with a invisible disability, but I used to always make myself small in public and apologize for my wheelchair being in the way, or apologize that there was no place for me to sit in large rooms and audiences. But as soon as I got in the way, people noticed that something wasn't right. Because when you're in the way, what it does is it impacts society and reminds them that this world is not inclusive. So make space for yourself in this world. I only leave the house when I'm feeling comfortable doing so, because I think everyone deserves to have my best possible self. And so if I'm having that bad a day, I will stay home, but only for my own self-care and to manage my health. But I will not allow myself to become a recluse, because the world needs each of you. So get out and get in the way and get help.
Amen. Thank you so much. I love that. So, we have currently 15 people with us. We have people in and out, but 15 people currently on the live, and we just thank you once again. It's a Monday night, school night, work night. You didn't have to be here, so we thank you that, you're giving us your attention and your time to hear what we have to say, right, about September, which again, from the very beginning, we were talking about the issues and causes for the month of September: suicide prevention, rehabilitation, self-care. Yeah. We covered, I believe, those three and then some, right? When it comes in the context of disability, we've learned about how to address those, people first, right? When it comes to the vocabulary, right? So a person with a disability, not a disabled person or even handicap, right?
Oh my gosh.
Use.
Yes.
We learned about how a lot of times the context or the model, right? It depending on the person's, not depending, but because of the person's understanding of disability, it may be due to when they were introduced to the model, the model that they were introduced. So if it was in the 60s, the outdated language is going to be, in their vocabulary, in their conversation. In the 90s, we saw the social model. Now, today, we are more familiar. We see the independent models, right? Because we have the persons who are disabled, who are in pageants, who are in sports, who, they're thriving in all sorts of aspects and different industries, and they're in entertainment in all sorts of areas. And so we want to acknowledge that, and we thank you that you've given us this information, the resources. We learned about Johnny and Friends, and that great and valuable resource, as well as your own organization that provides resources for people who are newly diagnosed or newly disabled, whether it's temporary or permanent disability.
Right.
And I just want you all to know that you can find Dr. Yvette Pegues at Yvette Pegues, Yvette Pegues on on Instagram, and you're on Facebook. You have the website as well. So make sure that you go to her page so that you guys can follow. And if you have a need, or someone that has a need, you can reach out to her to get more information and support.
We also have a foundation that I started after I graduated to help students with disabilities get into and through college. So a lot of it is financial as well. There weren't a lot of disabled scholarships for me. And we can talk about more. Like, if you are interested in hearing more or some questions come up, feel free to leave comments, reach back out to Sabine, and we can talk more, or we can just respond to you using other platforms. So I have 2 Facebooks, one for Your Invisible Disability and one for Yvette Pegues. Everything online is under my name. So that's Twitter, that's TikTok, that's Instagram, and that's Facebook. I'm also on LinkedIn. So I guess that's 5 different platforms where you can reach out to me if you'd like to have a conversation, or if you have a workplace that needs to hear about it from someone who looks like it and who can talk about it. I'm happy to help support you as well. And I know we talked about language. I use the word disability because that's how we are protected under the American with Disabilities Act. But in other, audiences and in other situations, social situations and circles, you can say a person with a difference or, ability challenged. I've heard so many of them. But for the sake of the policy that I fight for at Congress and at the White House, that word works because it's written down and that's what they understand. So I hope that I have helped and supported you tonight. Know that you are not alone, and I will continue to support you. And I'm so grateful to you, cousin, for taking this mental health challenge because it's not easy, but it's so common and it's weaved in through people who are diagnosed, undiagnosed, and who are feeling unsafe and not leaving the house because they're afraid of what they may see. It's okay to be afraid, but it's not okay to allow fear to paralyze you, for lack of a better word. And you know how much I hate to hear that, but this is what I hear all the time. And I'm just so grateful to you, cousin, for allowing me to be on with you tonight, and for everyone who's been popping in and out on our Monday night.
Yes, ma'am. God bless you all, Miss Izzy. Great points. A kill, a kill, a kill back. And so everyone is just thanking you. Your invisible disability group. They're shouting out your
Hey, shout out to Akil, one of my business partners, Savannah. Girlfriend, we got to do some sushi really soon. We hang out a lot. Miss Izzy, I was so happy to meet you, but I haven't seen you since I met you in Georgia. So we need to reconnect so I can see those pretty babies, right?
Yes, yes, ma'am. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you all for being here. If you are just coming in, you weren't able to catch the whole thing, we'll have the replay for you to watch. Let us know your thoughts. Again, as my cousin said, if you have any questions, you need any support, you can reach out to her or reach out to me, and I'll make sure that she gets the word. Alrighty, you all have a good night, and may God bless you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
God bless.